Hello everyone, I'm Michelle from World Merit, and today I would like to talk about cross-cultural communication. So, as a cross-cultural organization, we know that cultural differences can act as a barrier to communication. The first step to solve this problem is to better understand the differences between cultures. So, today I will provide you with some tools and tips to recognize and adapt to cultural signals, so you effectively can communicate with people all around the world. So the first step we will be talking about is how to understand cultural differences better. And we will be using the Hofstede 6 dimensions of culture model to define these cultural differences and better understand the values and behaviors underlying cultures. So there are 6 dimensions Hofstede is talking about, and the first one is power distance. A culture can either be high or low on power distance. When a culture is low on power distance, this means that they do not accept power distributed to be unequally. This means power is shared. An example of a culture which has a low power distance means that, for example, the educational system is more focused on the students and there is no real hierarchy between teachers and students. Mostly Western countries have a low power distance culture. So on the other side, you have a high power distance culture, which means that they do accept power to be distributed unequally. You have mostly complex hierarchies in these kind of cultures. An example is that within these cultures, the educational system is more focused on the teacher, and there is definitely a clear hierarchy between teacher and students. Countries such as East European, Latin, Asian, and African countries have mostly high power distance. So this was the first dimension of Hofstede. And the second dimension of Hofstede is that he defines that a culture can either be individualistic or collectivistic. So an individualistic culture is more focused on personal needs instead of group needs. An example of a culture which is individualistic is that these people feel that speaking one's mind is always good. So it's good to say what's on your mind and be direct about this. Mostly developed and Western countries have an individualistic culture. On the other side, you have the collectivistic cultures, which are mainly focused on group needs. They find it very important that harmony is always maintained. So harmony stands above speaking your mind. Less developed countries and Eastern countries mainly have a collectivistic culture. The third dimension Hofstede is talking about is that a culture can either be masculine or feminine. When a culture is feminine, it means that the culture focused on feminine characteristics. So the society focused on cooperation, caring, quality of life, and is more focused on consensus. An example in a society which has a feminine culture is that they are trying to balance work and life. Mostly Nordic countries, some Latin and Asian countries have this feminine culture. On the other side, you then have the masculine culture, which is more focused on masculine characteristics such as achievement, assertiveness, and they are mostly more focused on competition. So in these societies, you mostly see that work stands above family, and they are not really focused on a work-life balance. Countries such as Japan and German-speaking countries, Italy and Mexico, are mostly masculine cultures. And then in between feminine and masculine, because you, of course, not always have to be on the extreme side, are the English-speaking and Western countries, which are mostly in between. So that was the third dimension. The fourth dimension of Hofstede is that a culture can either be low or high on uncertainty avoidance. When a culture is low on uncertainty avoidance, they feel comfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity, and they are relaxed about the future. In these societies, people often have no problem with changing jobs. Change is something they feel comfortable about. Mostly English-speaking countries, Nordic and Chinese countries, Chinese-speaking countries have this low uncertainty avoidance culture. On the other side, you have cultures which are high on uncertainty avoidance, and they really feel uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. So they try to control the future by structure. These people in the societies with a high uncertainty avoidance culture often tend to stay in jobs even if they dislike the job. Eastern and Central European, Japan and German-speaking countries are more a high uncertainty avoidance culture. So this was the fourth dimension. Then we have the fifth dimension, where Hofstede explains that a culture can be either focused on long-term goals or short-term goals. When a culture is focused on the short term, they are more focused on the past and the now. They try to maintain honor traditions and norms, while they are actually a bit suspicious about social change. For example, people in these societies tend to focus on consumption and social spendings. Mostly the US, Australia, Latin American, African and Muslim countries have these short-term focus. On the other side, you have the long-term focus, where they are more focused on the future and they encourage efforts of change to prepare for the future. People in these societies tend to focus on savings and funds to have available for investment in the future. They're really focused on the future. East Asian and East and Central European countries having this long-term orientation. In between short and long-term orientation, there are South and Northern European countries and South Asian countries. So the last dimension of Hofstede is that a culture can either be indulgent or restrained. When a culture is indulgent, it means that they encourage free fulfillment of people's own drives and desires, which are related to enjoyment of life and having fun. For example, the people in these societies have the perception of personal life control, so they feel that they control their own lives. Mostly South and North American countries, Western European and Sub-Sahara African countries have this indulgence culture, where it is encouraged to enjoy life and have fun, so fulfill your desires. You also have cultures which are more restrained, means that they try to control the fulfillment of needs and people's desires, which therefore they regulate this by strict social norms. People in these societies tend to have the perception of helplessness, which means that they feel that they are not in control of what happens to them in their lives. Eastern European, Asian and Muslim countries tend to have this restrained culture. So these were the 6 dimensions of Hofstede. To repeat them again is the first dimension in which you can define cultural differences is power distance. The second dimension is if a culture is either individualistic or collectivistic. The third dimension is if a culture is either masculine or feminine. The fourth dimension is if a culture is either high or low on uncertainty avoidance. And the fifth dimension is if a culture is even focused on long-term or short-term goals. And the last dimension is if a culture is either indulgent or restrained. So these 6 dimensions provide insights and understanding of differences between cultures. Now you are aware where these cultural differences come from. We want to provide you with some tips to increase cross-cultural communication. So when you are communicating with someone from a different culture, first of all, it's always very important to listen carefully. It can be that people from different cultures have different accents, and it makes it more difficult to understand someone. So listen carefully and respect the different accents. Secondly, always try to seek and ask for clarity. Show your willingness to understand the other person. This will cause a better communication between the two of you. It also always helps to ask open-ended questions to gather more information and to be able to better understand this person from the different culture. Another tip is that it's very helpful to use simple language. And with simple language, I don't mean that you need to pretend that you're speaking to a toddler. I mean that you just need to use common words which mainly everyone can understand. Another one is that it's very helpful to sometimes slow down your pace of speaking and at the same time check for understanding. Are you going too fast? Do you maybe need to repeat yourself? So that's of course the other tip. Be ready to repeat yourself. Moreover, it's very important to pay attention to someone's nonverbal communication. How much personal space do they use? What hand gestures do they use? And try to adjust your behavior in a respectful way towards the other culture. And lastly, of course, also very important, always take into account individual differences. It doesn't mean that every individual from one culture acts and behaves the same. So take individual differences into account. So the tips are: listen carefully, seek for clarity, use simple language, slow down your pace, pay attention to nonverbal communication, and take into account individual differences. We hope these insights support you in your cross-cultural communication, and we wish you a lot of fun in learning from each other and mingling with different cultures. Thank you very much.